Chonggung Pero Oh No Pei Bei Wu Ne Cha Wu Heiso. All right, so now that we got those questions out of the way, questions and answers, I would like to present my research on the Korean language. The Korean language in general, we have to talk about three different things that are incorporated in it in all languages. But obviously, since we're studying the Korean language, it's what's incorporated within Korean language. So we're going to talk about language, origins, and family, phonology, and writing, syntax, and word order of the language. Okay. Well, firstly, with the language origins and family of the Korean language, despite the fact that the Korean peninsula was overtaken by both the Japanese and the both the Japanese and the Chinese, the Korean language is very unique, and so it's very hard to categorize it in a lot of other languages, which is why some scholars put it in a category all by itself. There is divided opinion on this whole family, language family for the Korean language, and so it could possibly go with the Atlantic language family, and then some other scholars say it could go with the Austronesian language family, but there's still a great deal lack of knowledge about this language origins, and so it's really a highly debated topic, and that's why it could kind of be put in a class by itself, especially with its writing style when we get on later, because it's very unique in its writing style. Even though as a language, Korea actually borrows many words from the Mandarin Chinese language. About 50% of its words are actually borrowed from the Chinese language. But that doesn't seem to change the actual category that this language is put in. It doesn't bear any resemblance to really Japanese either, or at least it hasn't been proven. So it can't be categorized as Japonic either. Well, since World War II, the Korean language has also started to borrow words from the English language, thus creating Konglish, which is talking with some words in English and some words in Korean. People will write this way. When they're like writing in English, then they'll write sometimes a variety of words, and you go, okay, well, that's not exactly English, but it's not Korean either. It's like a combination of the two. So in the world today, there are roughly about 78 million people in the world who speak Korean as their first or native language. And there are about 9 dialects, counting the North Korea and South Korea combined in the Korean language altogether.
Did you hear a cat? I heard.
All right, so the second subject I'm going to be talking about is the phonology and writing. And this was very interesting because Koreans, even though they spoke in Korean, they actually wrote in Chinese, especially during the Chinese occupation in 108 BC to 313 AD. 5th century AD, they started writing in classical Chinese. 3 systems were devised for writing Korean with Chinese characters. In these 3, the first system was a combination of Chinese characters with special symbols to indicate Korean verb endings and other grammatical markers. The second system used Chinese characters to represent all the sounds of Korean and was mainly used to write poetry. And the third way was they borrowed the Chinese words and then gave them Korean meanings and like readings, and then invented 150 new characters. So that was what they kind of did with the Chinese system there. Well, while they were doing that, then as it turned out, most of the people who were learning this language, it was super complicated the way they had done it. And it took a lot of time and effort to be able to write it and be able to understand it, and in all this education. And the common people didn't have time for any of this. They had no time to learn it. They had to work. And the elite people were the ones that had time to learn this and be able to write and read. So the common people could not write or read, not because there was any law against it or anything like that. It was more because they didn't have time to learn that, because it was super complicated. So in 1444, the king at the time decided that he was going to get a group of scholars together, and he was going to make sure that the common people could write and read, because he would create something that was easier to learn. And so the group of scholars got together, and basically they created the language of the common people so that the common people could write and read in their own language. And this, for amount of time, was only used by the common people because it was considered kind of like crude and vulgar in the way it was done. And they still considered like the Chinese writing high class and stuff like that. But the common people did have something to write with now. This language, though, that they created was a cross between an alphabet and a syllabary. So the symbols transparently reflected individual sounds in each word, but also were assembled into symbolic blocks. All right, so the main thing that you need to know about word order and syntax in Korean is that it's like the opposite of English, because it's subject, object, verb, and it always ends with a verb, or it always ends with an adjective. So it could be subject, adjective, or subject, object, verb. Sometimes the object will be omitted, but then in that case, then there's just a subject, verb. But it's always going to end with a verb or an adjective. So the subject refers to the person, thing, noun, or whatever that is acting. The subject does the action of the verb. And then the object refers to whatever the verb is acting on. Sometimes there is no object, as I said before. But Korea works by head final as their things. The heads are found at the end of their phrases. The main element of a phrase is a head. So that's very simple to see how it's differently ordered than English. An example sentence would be that when we write I love you, that when we write that in Korean, then we end up with love at the end of the sentence. In general, that's the interesting stuff that I learned. Thank you so much for watching.